Hey, I'm Michael, and this is Michael in the Middle. It's an intergenerational relational podcast for people who are interested in better human interaction. I'm glad you're here. Hey, welcome in, friends, to episode number 8. Flying solo again this week, like I did one time about a month ago. And I think there will be those moments throughout the podcast where I'll just come to you on my own to kind of share some things that I've been thinking about. Got a lot of great guests in the queue, just working on schedules for everybody, and trying to pull all of that together sometimes is a little bit of a challenge, but I'm feeling good about what I believe I ought to try to share here for this episode number 8. It's maybe a little bit more somber than some of the others, because I've been thinking a lot about just how things end up happening as we grow older, the inevitability of mortality. I know, like really happy thoughts right now, huh? But I go to funerals a lot. To a certain extent, it's a part of my responsibilities and the work that I do. Been real involved with alumni and friends of the university, Trevecca Nazarene University, where I work, and also the life of our church. I'm involved in the Kiwanis Club of Nashville and some other organizations. And so from time to time, I find myself at a funeral, and someday I would love to do a whole thing about great eulogies that I've heard. Some of the best stories happen when you get to a funeral, and things that I hadn't heard before about someone, or you learn something new about somebody that you thought you knew really well. Yeah, I'm going to share a couple of personal stories with you and try to bring it home with something maybe for us all to think about. Not too long back, I noticed in a new profile picture for social media that I had posted, I noticed clearly that I'm aging. I look a little older than I used to. My wife and I will go out to eat, and we'll start talking about something with a server. And the other day we were here in Nashville and grabbed a quick bite to eat, and we were looking at who the first 3 hosts and musical guests were going to be in the new season of Night Live, because our youngest son, James Austin Johnson, is a part of the cast at Saturday Night Live now, and we just had that out there on the table, and young man came over that was waiting on us there, and he started talking to us a little bit about, first of all, letting us know that Kendrick Lamar, who's going to be the first musical guest on October the 1st, was kind of like the soundtrack for people our age. And my wife said, "Well, how old do you think I am?" And he said, "Well, I'm figuring in your mid to late 40s." And of course, we're 62 years old. And I'm sitting over there kind of cynically thinking this guy is really buttering us up. But when Sarah said it's going to be 40 in December, he was really surprised. People are rarely surprised when my wife Sarah says that she's just 2 days younger than I am. While my body doesn't look a whole lot different than it did 10 years ago, it's easy to see the in the deepening creases around my eyes. My skin's a little bit looser, at least on my hands. And I was thinking, collagen ain't what it used to be. But I'm not ready for the Botox thing yet. In fact, I don't think I ever will be. It'd be easy to kind of get down about the fact that the days that are in front of me are fewer than the days that are behind. And, while it's tempting, I've chosen to consider how I might embrace however many years I have left with joy and anticipation. The heaviness of our present societal angst, uh, just we can't let it overwhelm us. We can't let it overwhelm the possibility of the good that is still to be done. Like one reason I'm thinking about my own mortality is that my amazing, full of life, proud to be a Texan mother passed away on the night before Thanksgiving in 2022. Um, we're going to celebrate her birthday on October 5th. Um, she would have been 86 had she lived. Um, when she passed away, she had just turned 85 7 weeks earlier, and really did seem to be in excellent health. We we had no clue what was happening. Her passing was instant. The doctors call it sudden cardiac arrest, and every now and then I find myself choking up while thinking, man, I just wish I could have told Mother one last goodbye. I don't think there's anything that was left unsaid or anything that needed to be said that we hadn't told each other 1,000 times, but she was gone, in that instant. And so, you know, I do find myself longing for when we'll be reunited someday, and, other loved ones that have gone on. Back in May, mid-May, um, I, along with my dad and my brother Jeffrey and his wife Julie, we were joined by my dad's sister Karen on a pilgrimage to Hamlin, Texas, to say a final earthly goodbye to my mother, Crawford Johnson. And you never had the pleasure of traveling the wide open spaces of West Texas. You're missing out, at least on being able to see for miles in any direction. I was amazed as we drove across the flatlands of West Texas out there. It was hot, a lot like it was today here in Nashville, near 100 degrees. And about 3 weeks before my mother passed, she said to my dad, just kind of out of the blue, Talmage, since we've decided to be cremated, I know what I want you to do with my ashes when the time comes for me. I want you to scatter them around my mother's grave in Hamlin. And when I tell you that my mother hated funerals, I'm not exaggerating. Um, I I even said at funeral to a few people, thank you for coming. Um, you know, I'd like to think that my mom would have come for yours if you went before she did, but I'm not so sure. Funerals were hard for her. It was hard for her to go to funerals because of the one she went to for her mother in 1950. My mom was 14. Her sister Faye was only 3 when their mother died of cancer at the age of 36. Part of the hazards of recording outside on my deck, plane occasionally is going to go overhead. So back to the story. My mom was 14. Her sister Faye was 3. And her mom, Margaret Faye Shedd, was 36 years old. She died of cancer. She was a sweet and loving wife and mother, and fought for 2 years until the cancer took her. It became clear over time that my mother never really got over losing her mother. Although my granddad Crawford married again within a year, and he had a good life of 46 years with Helen, he never completely got over losing Margaret Faye. How do you ever get over losing your first love and the mother of your children? John Thomas, also known as JT or Uncle Jake, my granddad Crawford, was a strong, tall Texan with a strong, deep voice, but he had a really tender heart. And Jeffrey and I didn't get to spend near enough time with him, but huge impression on us. The Hamlin Memorial Cemetery, where we went to scatter my mom's ashes, was surprisingly well cared for. It's a small town, still kind of driven economically by a grain elevator near a railroad track there. It was about 100 degrees, like I said. It was cooled only slightly by the 30-mile-an-hour winds that were sweeping across those flatlands that surrounded us. As Jeffrey started to sprinkle the ashes from the container, I said, "Be careful. Mother's going to get blown all over the place." I kind of a crazy sense of humor, I guess, but my mom loved to laugh. And so as we, were there standing in the midst of some sadness, it kind of felt right that we shared a little laugh, with my mom. We all sort of winced and laughed at the same time. Jeffrey reminded me that those winds might just carry Mother to many of the places where she lived during her high school years. And I think it was 8 or 9 towns across this before she graduated from Sherman High School and then headed off to Bethany, Oklahoma. Bethany Nazarene College is now Southern Nazarene University. And that's where she ended up going to college. Mother loved to travel. Her passport had over 50 countries represented in it. She loved the hills and trees of Mississippi and Tennessee. She treasured certain things about her many years in Oklahoma, but her heart always belonged deep in the heart of Texas. I wish I could hear her play that right now. And those wide open spaces and the time that passed between her years in Hamlin intersected for me in a meaningful way. The day before we went to the cemetery, we met up with Colonel Thomas J. Jerry Curtis and his wife, Terry Stringer. Terry was my mom's first cousin, but they were more like sisters. Terry's mom, Eileen Shedstrom, mother Faye's sister, and her dad, who I only ever knew as Uncle Nig, was the song leader at the Hamlin Baptist Church, where John Osteen was the pastor. Nig and Eileen served with the Osteens years later in Galena Park, Texas, down in the Houston area as well. I took some pictures of the Baptist and Nazarene churches there in Hamlin after we left the cemetery. I wanted to have a visual image that I could carry back with me, where Granddad's life in ministry had crossed paths with John Osteen. And yes, I'm talking about the John Osteen, who ended up founding Lakewood Church, now led by his son Joel. J.T. Crawford, my mom's dad, and John Osteen were the best of friends for several years, particularly during their time in Hamlin. And the Baptist church was quite a bit larger than Nazarene Church, but John saw something in JT's life, my granddad's life, that resonated. And he even considered an invitation from a Nazarene General Assembly, a General Superintendent, to join the Nazarene denomination. The story, history tells the story of how Osteen later left the Baptist church to go with a more charismatic movement that ultimately resulted in the founding of what we know now as Lakewood Church. That church was formed and ministered to, and ministered to a low-income area of Houston, and it preached a message of God's desire to help people live a fuller life through the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That, that declaration at Lakewood Church, "This is my Bible," still resonates even with me, even in a day of seeming unbelief and occasional scoffing about the type of people the Osteens were. I mean, it's a kind of word for me. I'll put it like this: Granddad Crawford never led a church larger than a couple hundred people. He and Meemaw Helen ended up pastoring churches not only in Texas, but also in Nevada, Mississippi, and Washington before they retired in Richland, where they ultimately provided care for Meemaw's special needs sister for many, many years. So while not as many people know about the Crawford family, I like to think that Granddad's genuine spirit maybe played a role in how the Osteens were able to minister to millions. And I mean, we don't ever know for sure how the way we're interacting with someone at a given time is going to impact not only them, but the people that they will influence later on. You know, a lot's been made, maybe particularly in religious circles, about the megachurch movement and the approach to ministry that Joel Osteen uses. A lot of people refer to it as the so-called prosperity gospel, and I would admit that that is capable of being abused, but I've always kind of admired the Osteen. The idea God loves us and wants to see good things occur in our lives is not antithetical to the word of God that we argue over so often. And I just have to tell you, believing for a better day, at least to me, is always more inviting than hoping the world comes crashing down around my feet. I can tell you with no degree of shame or embarrassment whatsoever that one of the presets on my wife's car is the Joel Osteen channel. When life threw Sarah a huge curve several years ago that threatened her health and her career, Joel's messages of hope were life-giving for her. Um, I just have to say that you know, maybe because my granddad Crawford knew Joel's daddy pretty well, maybe that blood pretty thick, and that's one reason why I have a warm spot in my heart for the Osteens. But I like that message of hope. I like the idea that there's a better day coming. Back to West Texas, while riding through those wide open spaces out there, my mind went to what it must have been like for my mother at age 14 to lose her mother to cancer. And I remember my mother's own battle with breast cancer in 1984 that included a radical double mastectomy from which her body and mind never fully recovered. Thought about how my mother had her own strong opinions about certain things, but you know, over time, I saw that she began to open her heart to loving people, even people with whom she often disagreed. Thankfully, my mother lived another 71 years after her mom died. And mother's 85 years on this earth were filled with so many wonderful experiences. She'd have to suffer a long, debilitating illness that preceded, you know, her death when it came to call. I watch other people agonize over how long a loved one is ill and what sometimes even the treatments can do to a body. I will say this: I intend to honor my mother's memory and that of her parents and extended family by sharing the good news that comes from knowing and serving a good and loving God. My mother knew what it meant to open her arms wide and love God and love people. And I think those wide open spaces of West Texas and the process of time helped her do that. And I know her example is still helping me when I look at that. When I think about some of these things where a loved one is missing, someone is gone that meant a lot to us, I think about how sometimes we try to shut those emotions down, or we just can't bear the thought of giving too much time to all of that. But I think it's important while we have an opportunity, you know, to take certain thoughts captive. Like, what does it mean to to be thinking soberly about the things that are going on in our lives, and how do we deal with the idea of our own mortality and missing someone that we love so much. There's another story that that kind of relates to this whole thing, and um, I'll try to make it brief. By the way, I think so often now that I've got this little podcast going that you know I'm really honored that that anybody's listening. So if you're out there right now and you're listening on on an audio platform, or you're watching on YouTube, thank you. Thank you for um, going along this journey with me and considering how we can spur one another on to love and good works as the scriptures encourage us to do. So I remember several years ago when I was um, still coaching women's golf at Tribeca Nazarene University. Man, I had a blast doing that for almost 13 years. Um, there's something about being out on a nice golf course and watching our ladies give it their best. And sometimes we did really well. Sometimes we were looking forward to the next round, if you know what I mean. But boy, it was a good time. A lot of what I did was try to be an encourager, help the girls believe that the next shot was going to be better, maybe than the one that they just hit. And I carried a lot of water around to them as well. Um, Back to the story that I was going to tell you. I was at Hermitage Golf Course here in the Nashville area. It's one of Middle Tennessee's most beautiful places. I love it. And I was checking our team's practice round, chatting with a couple of coaches from other schools, and that's when it happened. Um, it was all that became really all that came between me and an errant tee shot from a player from one of the other schools, and a tee time in heaven was a thin piece of plexiglass on my golf cart. I never heard the heads up from the girl who hit the shot, much less see it coming at me. So there wasn't time to see my life pass before my eyes in this moment, but I did a lot of soul searching shortly after that. I mean, if you're not familiar, with a golf cart, there's a little flip up top where a plexiglass window that is usually just right on line with where the steering wheel is, and then sometimes it's open all the way to the ceiling. And I mean, it could have been bad. The next 2 days were beautiful out there on the golf course. My team played pretty well. Had a good moment or two with some friends at the course. I played church softball on that Monday night with our oldest son, and it was a lot of fun. As I recall, it was 2013, so it's 9 years ago. Played church softball on that Monday night, and between innings, my friend Ron came over to say hello, and that's when it really hit me, almost as hard as that golf ball hit my cart, that someday my life will come to an end. My friend Ron, at that time, was still playing ball, but he was pretty sick. Um, he had to go through some really harrowing surgeries and and a lot of treatments. He had cancer in his abdominal area, but I mean, Ron's the kind of guy most men wish they could be. Ex-college athlete, successful in business. Um, he's got a beautiful wife, great kids, daughters-in-law, grandkids. And what I remember about that episode is that Ron, even then, when he was still really sick and didn't know how it was all going to turn out. And by the way, Ron's still really doing well. But he faced that whole issue then with great gusto, and I mean, he's a real answer to prayer. I remember that so well. But seeing Ron and thinking about how different it could have been if that golf ball had been just a little higher. I remember Ron coming over and and saying hello. And as he walked away, I said, "Man, I love you, brother." And Ron walked away back over to his dugout, and I went home that night and I started thinking, man, you know, what if that was the last time I had gotten to say anything to Ron? And then I thought, man, Ron has cancer, but I almost got hit by a golf ball traveling 100 miles an hour. I mean, I could have been gone in an instant in some respects, like my mother was. I mean, we all could. Um, in 2007, similar experience, although not as serious with what Ron was dealing with. After being warned of the likelihood of blood pressure and heart problems if I changed my ways, I started trying to lose weight, and in 2007 was successful in dropping 35 pounds over the next few months. I mean, I need to do the same thing now. I don't know what it is about growing older. It's easy to pick up weight than it is to let it go. But around that same time in 2007, it was discovered that I had a malignant melanoma on my back. It was removed, and the doctors said they got it all. It was early. It was shallow. All good news for skin cancers, but nevertheless, it was a pretty good sized chunk out of my back that they had to take. There was a 7-day period or so where I really didn't know, for sure what they were going to come back and say. I mean, they cut on me twice. First time said they needed to come. So I was waiting to, hear for almost a week. During that time of not knowing for sure, I made a vow to be more intentional about a lot of things. Mainly that I would keep one goal at the top of this. And that is, I want to say, I, I want to, I want to say that people matter to me. I want to say, in sooner or later, I'm going to speak to somebody for the last time. So that's kind of on my mind. Um, that is best, can still be incredibly difficult. Um, I mean, I've been really blessed. I've got no complaints at all. Um, I truly feel like God's been better to me than I could have ever deserved, as cliche as that sounds. But I want my life, my words, my actions to be an encouragement to those around me. And when that last time comes, I pray that whatever I've said to them will be a blessing and not a curse. I uh, I think one of the things that probably is motivating me as much as anything these days to do this podcast, to try to write a blog every now and then, to speak a good word if I have an opportunity in front of a crowd somewhere, or just if it's over lunch with a couple of people. I want to be as generous and encouraging as I possibly can in those moments. Um, so every now and then, Sarah and I will drive out past our house here just a little bit. We live about a mile from Sheets Branch area of Old Hickory Lake, and I mean it's really pretty out there, especially as it gets toward sundown. And it sometimes in the summers there's almost like a layer of pollen that you can see in the air. In fact, it's still around here on September 21st as I'm recording this, and got a little bit of a scratchy throat out here on the deck. But boy, it's beautiful. I'm loving it. There's still some for those of you who noticed that when we record out, there's crickets and cicadas and the sounds of nature in the background. Maybe there's something that's almost spectacular about a beautiful sunset. Um, we have a car that has a sunroof on it. I do want a convertible again one of these days, make it easier. But rolled the windows down the other night and opened that moonroof up, and the sun was setting on the lake, and the song "The Last Time" by Leanne Womack came on. And she's talking about lost love, but listen to some of these lyrics, and I'll wrap this thing up. If I'd have known it was the last time, I'd have held on I'd held on a little longer and let that moment linger, and never let your fingers slip away from mine. If I'd known there'd never be another day, I would have watched you as you walked away and kept my eyes on you till you were out of sight. If I'd have known it was the last time. If I'd known then what I know now, I'd never let you disappear into the crowd or turn away the way I did with so much left unsaid. If I'd have known it was the last time. Maybe the bottom line of what I'm trying to say, talking about my mom and thinking that through, I don't feel like there was a lot left unsaid, but I wish I had gone in the house instead of just told her I loved her on the phone when I dropped my dad off earlier that day. Don't make the mistake of taking a moment or a friend or loved one for granted. Say what needs saying now and love like there's no tomorrow, because someday there won't be. Love like there's no tomorrow, because someday there won't be. I'm thinking about that kind of thing these days, and I want your days to be happy and blessed. And one way, even in the midst of sorrow, when you've lost a loved one, attention to those moments and you've said what you needed to say. Every time you were together, you won't look back with regret. You'll look back with gratitude that you seized the moment when you had it. I don't know who in your life, if there is anyone in your life, where there was once great love and there was great fellowship and communion and camaraderie. I don't know if you had somebody like that in your life that's still here and they're still available to say something to you, but there's been a break in the relationship. There's been a sense in which, been a long time since you said something to somebody. Don't look back with regret that you didn't make it right while you still had the opportunity. Letting go of angst and hard feelings is so freeing, and it'll be especially so when it comes down to the point of taking the moment for granted, and you said what you needed to say while you still could. Sometimes that could be a hard word, but it could also be a process of letting someone up off the mat, forgiving someone, telling someone you love them. May not mean you're going to spend every waking hour together again, but there's a lot of healing in a kind word. And when there's a break in a relationship, somebody's got to make the first move, and it might as well be you. Thanks for being here. See you next time.